The Bahamas is one of the most beautiful places in the world, but behind the beaches and the sunshine, there's a story that we can't ignore. A generation of young men and women are being lost to gangs and violence and choices that cut their lives short before they even begin. This isn't something new or unique to the Bahamas. This is a global phenomenon. Our guest today knows this story all too well. He lived it. As a teenager and a young adult, he was caught up in the streets in crime, drugs, and destruction. But his life was radically transformed, and that transformation became his calling. For over 4 decades, Dr. Dave Burrows has been a pastor, entrepreneur, author, and a mentor, working with governments, churches, and families across the world. He has dedicated his life to showing people that change is possible, that purpose can be found, and that transformation is the key to saving lives and building nations. In this conversation, we go beyond the pulpit. We talk about his journey from the streets to global leadership, his honest perspective on the crisis facing youth today, succession, and the universal principles of transformation that can change not only a person, but a family, a community, and a nation. This is Finding Harmony, and today we sit with the transformational specialist, Dr. Dave Burrows. Well, I am most excited, and I know my wife is most excited because our first guest is none other than Dr. and Pastor Dave Burrows. Let's clap it up for everybody. We're so excited to have you. I'm hoping that you're happy to be on this podcast with.
I am very much excited.
Awesome,
very much excited.
Awesome.
Wonderful.
Now, one of the things that we want to make sure we do when we have discussions with guests is kind of center the conversation and focus, right? Right now, we would deem you as a transformational specialist, right?
Indeed.
And so we want to talk about things as it relates to transformation, becoming a leader, also understanding crisis and different aspects of that nature. So we'll kind of dive into those particulars in a second. But I want to give people in the audience a perspective of just how far you've come to where you are now, right? If you know anything about Pastor Dave Burrows, you know that he had a troubled youth. Would we say, Dav?
Oh yeah. It was a colorful backstory.
A very colorful backstory. We won't get into the particulars because, right, we just won't go there right now. But obviously that led you into college to transforming your life. So I want to give the audience kind of a perspective of just your journey and how did you get to where you are. And I do want to say this. One of my friends, when I got married to Davrielle and I introduced her to my friend's father, and he was like, "Who's your father?" And he was like, "Dave Burrows." Oh my goodness, Dave Burrows. Let me tell you something about Dave Burrows. If he can change, anything's possible. Anybody could change. So just to give people a perspective of that past. But yeah, man, just kind of give us a quick backstory just to who you are and how did you land here?
Well, I started to think about my life, and there's one consistent theme in my life from the beginning until now, and that is transformation. Mm-hmm. So, as you mentioned, I had a very colorful past. I spent my early years, my teenage years on the streets. I was around some of the most notorious gangsters in the Bahamas. I ended up in police chases. I ended up in multiple situations that could have gone the wrong way. Mm-hmm. But through the grace of God, I was able to make it out. I had many scrapes, many challenges, but at the end of the day, I saw the light and my life turned around. I was transformed with the help of a friend, actually my brother-in-law, who's a basketball player. I was a basketball player. And I started to hang around with him. He took me to Bible studies. I looked at his life, I looked at my life, and I saw where if I didn't change, I could end up in some really bad situations. And, at the end of the day, there was a church service I was attending with him, and I made a choice. My life was transformed. And then it began a journey for me of helping others to transform. So transformation is a theme that has followed me throughout my life. And so, I think there are a lot of young men today in the Bahamas, not only in the Bahamas, but globally, whose lives have been transformed because of my transformation story.
When you say you made that choice, right? A lot of people say, well, yes, I give my life to the Lord and things don't change. Like, what are some of the principles you felt that you followed when you decided to say, okay, I'm going to change my life? What are some of the guiding principles that helped you stay on, a great path?
Well, I learned to live on purpose rather than instinct. So most people in the world today, they live on instinct. Instinct means you just follow what you feel or what you like. Living on purpose means that you have a design, you have a destiny, and there's a way to get there, and it overrides instinct. So I could just give you an example. Let's look at a dog, for example. A dog has no agenda. A dog doesn't have a negotiation. Like, he doesn't see a female dog and say, well, I wonder about her character. And, it doesn't matter. His instinct tells him just hop on, so he does. And so when men live like that, it's chaos and it's turmoil. And that's how I was living. I was living an instinctive life, and I did the same things that a lot of men do, and it ruined my life. And I discovered how to live on purpose. And when I discovered how to live on purpose, everything changed. And it's been a totally different journey for me right now because I'm living on purpose.
I'll jump in to say, we've seen just in the last few years, but honestly, there's been an increase in the last few weeks. If you look at the headlines, at least from a Bahamian perspective, in terms of young men, there was a story in the news where a very popular young man who was known for being a personality or a public figure, he was in a high-speed chase, and his family argued the case that he was abused in police custody, but now he's charged with being an accessory to murder. So you have this landscape where it seems like
attempted
murder. Sorry. This landscape where you see so many, the volume of people, like you were one of a few, I want to say at the time. And now it really seems kind of overwhelming. When you look at the state of young men in the country, what's your honest perspective about what's happening?
It goes back to what I'm saying. A lot of young men are living on instinct. They don't understand that God has a purpose for us. We have a destiny. And in order to get there, there are certain things that we need to do. If you don't have that perspective, then you just live day to day. You end up in situations that you didn't desire to be in. Every time I go to prison, I ask the guys in prison, I say, how many of you, when you were growing up, you said, my desire, one of these days, I would like to go to jail? And nobody raised their hand. I have never had one person who raised their hand and said that this is where they wanted to be. But yet you have thousands and millions of people in that position. So there's a disconnect somewhere. So people are not connecting their destiny to a purpose. And so because they live on instinct creates accidents. So you accidentally end up in jail. It wasn't, you didn't design it, but it happened because you were living on instinct. I heard a quote one time. It said that animals risk their lives for food, but humans risk their lives for acceptance.
Wow.
So you have a lot of young men, the animal, when they wake up in the morning, they're just looking for food, and there are all kinds of dangers. And so they walk into danger trying to eat. You have a lot of young men who walk into danger because they want to be accepted. They don't understand their purpose.
Wow.
That is so real.
Just to kind of give the audience perspective as well, like you advise governments and you advise leaders, like what are we still not getting right, you feel, when it comes to actively saving our youth?
Well, one of the biggest problems that we have globally, and as you said, I've advised governments, I've advised organizations in London, I've advised the Turks and Caicos government, did work in South Africa, Europe, Australia, New Zealand, and so on. I think the biggest mistake that people make in today's world is expecting to have better results without better people.
Break
Come
that
on.
down for us.
So, okay, we want crime to go down. But in order for you to have crime to go down and corruption to go down, you need better people. And if you don't have better people, you're not going to have a better outcome. A lot of people are not taking responsibility. They are saying, okay, we just don't want it to affect us, or we don't want it to be too bad. And so people are not looking at themselves as a part of the problem. But the problem that we have in a place like the Bahamas is that the pool is tainted. And as long as the pool is tainted, everybody that comes out of the pool are the same thing. So we look at the police, for example, and we say, okay, the police, they're corrupt. But they came from the same pool as the gangsters. So if you want a better outcome, you have to have a better people. And
That's deep.
That reminds me of the Visionary song.
yeah,
If you want a
if
brand
you want
new
a brand new
world.
world, yeah, you got to have a brand new people.
I had the distinct opportunity to be the daughter of the roughneck pastor. And obviously that term was coined along a part of your early ministry. But really one of those things that kind of sealed it was the experience that was peace on the streets. We look at the global landscape now with so many young men just lost, unfamiliar with the church, unfamiliar with the gospel, usually struggling for direction. And people feel hopeless. But when I think of that experience, and I think of experiences like it, I know that there's the capacity for people who are going down the wrong path to be impacted. And in your case, that was a huge experience with dramatic results. Talk about that movement and why you think it was so impactful.
Well, going back to something you said earlier, a lot of times we're saying that parents need to do this or parents need to do that. The reality of today's world is that we really don't have very many parents. We have baby daddies and baby mothers who are not necessarily together. And so young people are growing up without any type of guidance or direction. We're asking young men to be men, but they have never seen a man. When I say a man, I mean a real man, a responsible man. So if people will be what they see. So if all they see is turmoil and chaos, that's what they enter the world into, then that's what they become. In order to change that, they have to see something different. So in my case, my life was transformed. And I showed them something different. So I went to guys who were gangbangers, who were drug dealers, and so on. And I said to them, look, my life has changed. I was where you were. I've been in similar situations, but my life was radically transformed. And I represented the change. It's a difference between telling people you need to change and then being the change. When they saw the change in me, and many people, wherever I went, in the community, they would say, when Dave Burrows changed, if Dave Burrows can change, then it's possible.
Yeah.
And so I represented what change looked like. And young people were attracted to that because I spoke their language and I walked the road with them. So some of these young, Davrielle, you would know, sometimes on a Sunday afternoon, over the dinner table, I have 2 gang leaders having dinner in my house because I developed a relationship. I interacted with, we had a lot of activities for young people, positive activities, and it made a big difference.
Yeah.
So I want to switch gears a little bit. I want to talk about the transformational specialist. Just where did that term come from and kind of the origin behind that?
Yeah, as I mentioned earlier, what I began to realize in my life is that wherever I've been, transformation has been a result. So when I came back home to the Bahamas, first of all, my life was transformed. Then I began to influence young men, in particular in the Bahamas, and we have seen dramatic transformation. Then the transformation happened to young business people and young leaders, and then it just continued. And I've had the opportunity to work in all sorts of environments. So, for example, a lot of people don't know that I'm very entrenched in the business world. in leadership development, and so on. And what I'm seeing everywhere I go is that people's lives are being transformed. I'll tell you a quick story. I remember I was in South Africa in Mandela Square, and a guy starts following me and my wife, and I'm trying to figure out, why is this guy following us? And then I turn around, and then he taps me on the shoulder, and I turn around, and he said, "Are you Dave Burrows?" I said, yeah. He said, well, I just want you to know, he said, your testimony changed my life.
Wow.
He said, I was a drug dealer, I was a terrorist on the streets. He said, but hearing your story incentivized me to change my life. And he said, today I'm a publisher.
Wow.
And that was just an amazing, so that's when I began to realize, you know what, wherever I go, transformation seems to follow.
I think it's interesting that you mentioned the fact, and I mean, even if you think about it from a biblical perspective, you know, the word talks about overcoming by the word of your testimony, and the fact that your testimony inspires somebody else. And you would have mentioned that your brother-in-law had an impact on you, and that made you go and have an impact on others. And the reason that you were so effective with people from the streets was you had a street background. I think that might be part of the missing link that we're seeing. Speak to the importance of, first of all, sharing your story, because a lot of people could have discouraged you, like, oh, you know, you're a church man now, don't talk about these things, or being a man that young men could look up to, because sometimes the men that are in church don't necessarily seem aspirational. They don't necessarily do well in business. They're not ultra masculine and tough. So maybe they're not people that young men aspire to be. So talk about being that image of something that's not just saved, but, you know, living a life and thriving.
Yeah. Well, actually, what I find is, you know, there was a point in time where I stopped telling my story. But what I found out is that everywhere in the world where I go, whether it's Europe or Africa or the US, somebody comes to me and they say, man, thank you for telling your story because it provides hope for me. And that caused me to realize that it's difficult for people to change if they don't see the possibility of change. So until people look and they see a live transformation, then sometimes they feel like, well, okay, you know, church is for good people and God is for good people and not everybody can make it.
Yeah.
But many people, when they hear my story, they come to me and they say, wow, you know, it's possible. You know, even I remember some of the senior police officers said to me several years ago, they said, you changed the gang situation in the Bahamas. They said, you and Carlos Reed, you all changed it. And people were asking me to come back and do it again. And I'm like, we need other people to step up to the plate. You know, that time has passed for me. You know, I'm in a new role. I'm in a new season. So,
and to put a point on that, if you're listening or you know somebody who has that influence, who has that effect that Pastor Dave those had in the streets, and this is your time, this is your season, you're called for a time such as this. So if you're listening to this should inspire you to change, because you can actually change an entire nation. And once again, this is receipts talking. This is not just theory. This is the police department saying you guys changed an entire culture of the Bahamas as it relates to gang and violence. So you, the listener, or if you know someone who has that type of influence, you need to, you know, put that fire inside of you to actually step out, because they're not going to be listening to everybody and then everybody. They need people who have even the receipts in the streets, because they know, you know what you're talking about. You know, coming off air. You know what I mean? So yeah, I just wanted to point that out to you, that you need to do what you got to do in this season.
I just wanted to say this too, you know, to validate what I'm saying. Actually, the Minister of Youth at the time was Algernon Allen, and the Prime Minister was Hubert Ingram. They called us into cabinet, and they said, what you are doing is unprecedented. We want to give you money to continue doing what you're doing. And so we launched something called Operation Redemption.
I remember that.
Where we took gang members and put them to work in a car wash and so on. So I'm not talking about a fantasy. I'm not talking about something that hasn't actually happened. I'm talking about something that, we were able to make a difference. And that's one of the reasons why I wrote one of my most recent books. And that book is called Reaching the Streets. And so what it does, it chronicles the principles and gives examples of what we did. And these principles are translatable. So even reaching young people today, a lot of people don't know how to deal with guys from the streets. I give you an example. You could have a young man who just murdered 3 people, and you talk to his mother, and you ask the mother, you say, well, what can you tell us about your son? She say he was a good boy. And then we think the mother's lying, but she's not lying.
In her house.
As far as she was concerned.
Because you see, on the streets, he's Scarface. At home, he's Junior. If you try to talk to Scarface, you can't reach him. The mother doesn't know Scarface. She knows Junior. So when she said he's a good boy to her. I was a good boy to my mother. And she didn't know what I was doing. And she had no idea until, it came out. So.
And then she was in denial even after it came out from your own mouth.
Yeah. No,
not my son. Not my good son.
No, she couldn't believe it. She thought people were lying on me. And then she thought I was making up stories too when she heard some of the stuff.
But even what you're saying, it goes down to principles and that it can be applied anywhere. So this is not just for the Bahamas. Yeah. This is for the Caribbean. This is for the United States, DC, Chicago, LA, all of these, areas that we tend to see certain high crime rates and things of that nature. They can be applied.
And what I've been doing is, as I mentioned before, I'm a consultant for the government of the Turks and Caicos. I've also done consulting in the U.S., the London. UK, Ghana, South Africa. So I'm providing information and principles that all of these countries can use to duplicate what we did. Because what we did is not unique, but you have to have the right people to do it, and you have to know how to do it. A lot of people are afraid because they think if somebody is in a gang that this person is a bad person. But the truth of the matter is, a gang member is an ordinary person in an extraordinary environment. And they are and it's often 2 different people, because if you meet the guy when he's not going through the war, he's just like everybody else.
Yeah.
And so you have to remove the fear factor and understand that all of us are the same. Awesome. It's just circumstances and environments and things that happen in our lives to change us.
I remember I was a part of a youth initiative with the government, Carlos Reed, actually. This is earlier this year, funny enough. And it was Carlos Reed, the prime minister, and we were waiting on a particular artist to come and speak to them. These regular school kids, nothing of it, And we got to a point where we started to dive deeper. And Carlos Reed asked us questions to the kids. I don't know if the terminology is correct, but he was like, "Are anybody in here marked?" Right? And I didn't know that. I think that's the right terminology. No, he said, who in there have a dirty face? That's the terminology. And then 1, 2, 3, hands going. I'm like, not this little dude right here who looked like he can't.
In his school uniform.
He has a dirty face. Basically, means they can't go nowhere. They gotta go school home, far in the back roads. Nobody can see them because another gang have it out for them. They're on a target list. So it was like, just from me seeing these dudes are teenagers. How do you have a quote unquote dirty face? But life, environments, choices. You know what I mean? And just. Some of the things that you mentioned earlier, effects.
I think, and I mean, you kind of touched on it, you're approaching 70, you look great. But this is not a time for you to go back into the streets. This is a time for other people to go. But I think what's missing is that you had passion, you had skin in the game. You started this experience, not because you were an annoyed citizen who didn't want to deal with crime, but you started this experience because you were a young person whose life was changed, who felt like other people deserved change. So I feel like that might speak to some of the challenges that we're having. We're taking let's deal with this problem versus let's show this person that there's a better way of life. And I think that until our approach really humanizes these people and puts value on their
their lives,
experience, not just, hey, I want you to stop causing crime so I don't feel afraid. Hey, I want you to have a new life and a new experience.
Well, everybody is saying you all need to fix it. And who is y'all? You know, the truth of the matter is that unless somebody takes ownership, then we are passing it around to some nebulous person.
Yeah.
We have to say, I'm going to make a difference. And everybody has to ask themselves a question, what can I do? Either you can go on the streets, you can help finance somebody who's on the streets, you can find somebody in your neighborhood, you can build a relationship, you can support an organization that's doing something. But what we have is we have a lot of talk and very little action. People come to me all the time, Pastor Dave, you're doing a good job and that's nice what you're doing with the young people. And then they have money in their pocket and then they walk away. And they say, solve the problem.
Yeah.
So I want to kind of shift gears and talk about leadership in its entirety, right? And also want to talk about succession and also somewhat of crisis management too, because that came along with it within your story.
Yeah.
But there's a quote that you said that leadership always begins as an individual pursuit. If you cannot lead yourself, you cannot lead others. And you cannot lead yourself without self-discovery, self-actualization, and self-governance. Can you talk about the importance of self-discovery and, first of all, understanding what your purpose is and how you were able to affect people and change lives by your walk in leadership?
Well, we're all on a journey in life. And many times until, I remember Dr. Myles Munroe said this. He said there are two important days in your life, the day you were born and then the day you find out why. And when you find out why you were here, then it changes the dynamic completely. You begin to move in the direction of your destiny. So I think that's critical, understanding, who you are, why you're here. And when you discover your purpose in life, it guides you to where you need to go and what you need to do. And that's what happened to me. I was living a life without purpose, and where purpose is not known, abuse is inevitable. Yep. So I was abusing people, I was abusing substances, I was just an abuser. But when I discovered my purpose, then I began to cause other people to discover their purpose. So my transformation produced transformation in others. And I was always a leader, but I was leading in the wrong direction. But here it is now, when I discovered my purpose, I can lead people in a positive direction and cause them to be actualized in life and cause them to find their destiny.
Wow. And speaking of the fact that you've always been a leader, how did you, first of all, you spoke about Dr. Munroe, and just obviously you currently lead Bahamas Faith Ministries International, where we attend. But in the early age, how did you even team up with those other leaders and form Bahamas Faith Ministries? How did that even happen?
Well, connecting with Dr. Munroe is a crazy story because we grew up in the Bahamas. In fact, I didn't even realize it until years later, but I was in his neighborhood. He lived in Baintown, and I used to hang out in Baintown. But of course, he was a church guy, I was a street guy, and so we never crossed paths. I didn't even know who he was. I heard about it. I heard his name. I heard the music. I didn't even know it was his music. I just heard the music. But he and my sister were partners in ministry, and she invited him to go to Oral Roberts University. She invited me because I was in trouble in Florida, going through all kinds of things. And she said, why don't you come here into a more wholesome environment and things may be better for you. So I ended up at Oral Roberts University, and there I met Myles Munroe. As I said, I'd never seen him before in my life. I didn't know who he was. But we began a friendship. He asked me to come and hear him speak. He became a mentor to me. So when he returned to the Bahamas and he was starting Bahamas Faith Ministries, I became a co-founder. I became a partner in that initiative. And we stayed together until, he passed away. And that journey went through many, all kinds of arenas and events. So I traveled with him for a good period of time. I was the vice president of Myles Munroe. So I sat in a lot of meetings. I was the one who put together proposals, who did negotiations, because I have a business background as well. And I also have a technology background. So I use my background to influence the business environment, to influence the leadership environment, while also being a leader in terms of youth ministry and youth.
Wow.
So, I was multitasking.
Wow. That is a lot. And you worked alongside him for many years. What would you say is, I guess, the biggest leadership part of your mentorship, being mentored by him? What would you say is one of the biggest leadership lessons you've learned from him?
Well, I think one of the most important lessons that I learned is that you have to refine and develop your gifts to become who you were designed to be. I remember one time I was traveling the world, speaking, and I was doing a lot of things with young people. And he said something to me that I never forgot. He said, refine your gifts and a new group of people will call for you. So basically, I was speaking to young people. I was, using the roughneck pastor mode, street language, but he saw potential in me in terms of leadership and business and so on. And so he said, there's a new audience waiting for you, but you have to refine your gifts. And so I went in, I refined my gifts, and then I started getting the calls.
Obviously, again, I had a really interesting experience growing up. I was me and Drew were proper BFM babies. We were born and raised. And now that I'm older, it's such an interesting experience going to college, traveling around the world, realizing that this global figure by way of Myles Munroe was always just down the hall. And I could stop by his office and say hi. And I remember when he passed away, people were like, what was that relationship like with your pastor? And I was like, really, it felt like he was one of my uncles, and to put that together, that as a child and a young adult, I grew up with this wealth of knowledge, this wealth of wisdom and resources. And unfortunately, not in my case, I really did have perspective after a while. But for a lot of people, they really didn't feel the weight of how powerful that connection was, what an incredible resource he was, until he was no longer with us. And I want to say that I still mark this arguably as the worst day of my life. I don't want to top it, but worst day of my life so far was November 9th, 2014. It was a very interesting day, and it shifted the course of your life. It shifted the course of my life and our collective experience as a church forever. Take us to that day.
Wow. That was a pivotal day. It was just incredible. I remember it's very clear in my mind, because the first interesting part about it was that I was invited on the flight. And I didn't go on the flight, but Dr. Pinder, he and I were close, and he asked me to drop him to the airport. So I dropped him to the airport, and I said, I'm going to see you guys tomorrow. And I remember going home, and then the phone started ringing, and it was a very traumatic and weird experience, because I never thought that day would come. I never, there was no contingency plan for this happening. We all figured, Dr. Munroe is going to be with us forever. So it was a shock. And it required a high level of recalibration. So I sat in my living room when I got the official word, and I'm like, wow, this has really happened. And so now, we gotta do something. And I took the responsibility on myself without kind of as a natural response. I thought about it, and I was like, well, I got to do something. And so I called, everybody together, called the board together. We met, and we made a decision. that I would lead the ministry going forward. And that was a total change for me because I was going in a different direction, and it required a lot. So there were a lot of lessons that I learned, some powerful lessons that I learned. I mean, it was just an incredibly difficult experience, but an experience of incredible growth. Mm-hmm. And that's one of the reasons why I wrote the book, Following a Legend, because there's some lessons that I learned about transition and succession that I believe can benefit a lot of other people. And I've actually done seminars around the world. You know, last year or year before last, I did a major session in South Africa. Well, actually, that was this year. I did one also on leadership transition and succession. So a lot of people have been asking me questions. Well, how did you do it? How did you make it? Many times when things like that happen, incidences like that happen, churches or organizations tend to fall apart. In my journey in writing the book, I began to realize that most organizations, churches and businesses have no succession plan. Mm-hmm. Most organizations and businesses, especially small businesses, they fail because they don't have a succession plan. So when the leader dies, the business dies. Mm-hmm. What I learned in the process is that there are some principles that you need to have in place that ensure your success in the future. You know, I remember telling the congregation that we have lost the visionary, but we have not lost the vision. Mm. And that's so important. A vision for your church, your organization, your business, whatever it is, needs to be written down so that if you are not there, the next person can run with it. The Bible says, write the vision down and make it plain so that he can run who reads it. Mm-hmm. If it's not written down, if it's not plain, when it's your time to run, you don't know where to go.
Wow. And even in succession, I feel like you kind of hint towards it, even in succession, succeeding someone like a Dr. Munroe, like how did you navigate the pressures and the expectations and even just making sure you stay true to your own identity?
Well, you know, it's interesting that one of the most important scriptures in the Bible is the scripture where God was transitioning Joshua. Mm-hmm. He said, Moses, my servant, is dead. And then the next thing he said, only be strong and courageous. Mm-hmm. And I realized that one of the most important characteristics in leadership, transition, and succession is courage. Mm. Because if you don't have courage, you break down, you know, and you fall to competing influences. Yeah. You know, sometimes when you have a global icon who's passed away, everybody is trying to give advice. Mm-hmm. Some people are trying to get a position, or you know, you have competing factors. So you have to be strong, and you have to pull everything in order. You have to cause alignment with the vision. Mm-hmm. And then you have to tell people what their assignment is. Don't wait for them to start telling you what they want to do. Mm. So you have to look at the vision and see where everybody fits, and then direct people. And that's what I learned I had to do, because if I didn't do that, chaos would have reigned, and there was a high possibility of chaos if I wasn't strong and had courage.
One of the interesting stories I felt like Davrielle told me during that whole situation was when you guys were in the airport, and she said to you, "Dad, I'm scared." Can you talk about what your reaction towards her? Because I want you to kind of tell that story.
The funny thing about it is that until Davrielle told me, I didn't realize I said it.
Wow.
But I think, if I remember correctly, you know, everybody was scared to fly. Mm-hmm. I mean, terrified. Mm-hmm.
For context, for those, because you have to give context for the viewers. For those who don't know, obviously we're responding to a plane crash that happened the night before, and the volume of our family and friends are on another island.
Even more context, can you give perspective to who was actually on the plane and their relation towards you?
Well, on that plane was Dr. Myles Munroe, Dr. Richard Pinder, Lavad and Riddell Parks and their son, and then the two pilots, and then a friend of mine, Diego De Santiago from Los Angeles, California. So these were all a part of our organization and a part of our leadership team.
Just to be clear, so we have Diego, who's a friend of yours. You have Dr. Munroe, who was your mentor, brother at that time. Pastor Richard, who was like your best friend, brother at the time. And you had your mentees, Lavad and Riddell, as well as, their child.
Your
So
son, yeah.
that's not just random people. These are your actual inner circle, your day-to-day, from mentorship to eye level to, mentee. They were all part of your day-to-day operation at the time, especially you're transitioning out at this time as well. So I just wanted to kind of give the depth of individuals who was on that plane with you,
Yeah, you're talking about
on that plane.
More than half of the leadership team for Bahamas
Faith Ministries.
Yeah, so it was difficult. So the next morning we have to go to Freeport. So we're in Nassau, we have to go to Freeport, and then in the airport, Davrielle says, "Dad, I'm scared." And I said, "I'm scared too, but we don't have the luxury of fear right now."
Ooh, that's powerful. We don't have the luxury of fear right now.
Yeah.
I'll just refine it. He said, we don't have the luxury of catering to our feelings. He said, they need me and I need you. And that was one of those quotes, and this is my dad, but this, obviously he was in that Pastor Dave hat at the time, because I use that. Life comes with a lot of uncomfortable moments. I've recently become a mother. That's a lot of discomfort. Working, anything, in life, it comes with a lot of complicated feelings. And there are times that you can pay attention to your feelings. And that was one of those moments when feelings have to be secondary. You can feel afraid all you want. We got to get on this plane. And I use that when I'm up against something that I don't want to do, but I know it needs to be done. Like, we don't have the luxury of catering to our feelings right now because something bigger is at stake.
Wow. And for you to just step up, because even at that time, if I'm not mistaken correctly, there were like newspaper articles written to say, hey, he's not fit for this and he can't handle it. Because I believe you had like an interview afterwards and you broke down because of the magnitude of the situation. And then people wrote about you. How did you handle even those negative, comments and people saying, hey, he's not this, he's not that?
Well, I wasn't aware of a lot of it. I heard some of it, but I know who I am, and I couldn't waste my time addressing people who didn't understand what was going on and who I was. And I knew that they would see, and I knew the people that mattered understood. And at the end of the day, everybody would figure it out. My wife says something quite often. She said, people will understand why lobster is red.
That's a good one. Wow.
Do you get a level of, I don't want to say satisfaction because you don't perform for other people, but there were a lot of people who were like, oh, BFM is done. You had the number 1 and number 2, unfortunately taken in an instant. They're like, this church isn't going to last a year. We've celebrated 10 years of you being the pastor towards the end of last year. What does that feel like? Just knowing that there was a lack of faith, that first of all, that you could lead, and then really the church is in a thriving position. What does that feel like?
Well, the thing about it is that I knew what would happen. I heard voices. I heard what people said. Actually, people came to me. There were local pastors who came to me. One pastor in particular, he said to me, he said, I don't know how you did it. He said, because when our leader left, you had about almost half of the church or more than half of the church lead. So he said, how did you retain all of these people? Well, I think the important thing for Bahamas Faith Ministries is that we had a vision and we had a strong leadership team. Basically, I always tell people this, I was always a number 1 person. even though I was not functioning as a number one. So when I was required to take a number one role, it wasn't something that I had to shrink from or figure out what to do. I was already a number one. And I just took the vision. I took the leadership principles that I was already operating in. A lot of people didn't understand who I was at the time, but I was a global figure. You know, I traveled the world. I was called on by churches, organizations. I was consulting for organizations. I ran 2 businesses. I developed e-commerce for BFM. I negotiated contracts. A lot of things that Dr. Munroe did, I helped in the background. So there were some papers that he presented to, you know, the Bahamas government and to different entities that I was a significant contributor to, or I wrote it. You know, so it wasn't like I was a novice or somebody who didn't know what was going on and I was just thrust into a situation. So, and I had my own television program, you know. Many people thought that I had my own church because they saw my television program on Sunday mornings. So I was significantly involved as a leader, not just in the Bahamas, but globally. And I was mentored by Dr. Munroe. And so I was equipped, you know. He trusted me in terms of being the vice president of his organization. So I had a lot of experience as a leader. I did leadership seminars. I taught leadership. So this was just a practical application of what I already knew and who I already was in a different context. And, you know, there were challenges, but many people were surprised at how smooth it went. It went smooth because I knew how to plan. I knew how to organize. I knew how to pull people together. I knew how to place people in roles where they could be effective. I knew how to deal with detractors and people who didn't understand what was going on. So, you know, one of the interesting things is that one of Dr. Munroe's specialties was leadership. And so we were being taught leadership. I was actually involved in leadership. So this was like just applying what you already knew, what you've already learned, and applying it in a new environment. So it was a challenge, but it was not an insurmountable challenge because I was already prepared.
You know, you talked about the fact that we were able to continue after we lost Pastor Myles. And it made me think of a phrase that one of my professors at ORU used to use. And he said, you know, particularly, he didn't make this connection, but I'm noticing when it comes to Black churches or Bahamian churches, as opposed to those institutional older churches, the Presbyterian churches, even the Catholic churches, charismatic and Pentecostal churches tend to be associated with a person rather than a denomination. So you might have a church that's been around for 100 years. They've had 5 pastors. It's, I don't know, Sunlight Presbyterian Church.
It doesn't affect.
It's not predicated on who the pastor is.
Right.
But in our culture, that's Joe Blow Church down the road. That's so-and-so church down the road. And I think it ties into this, what he called, my professor, the cult of the personality.
Right.
So whereas this is not necessarily a church where everybody's connected to each other and they're in each other's business and they're in each other's lives and they're serving and they're helping, this is an auditorium where people gather to hear a speaker whom they like. Yeah. Talk about the negative effect of the cult of the personality.
Well, I think one of the problems with the modern church is that the modern church is like a sports game. You know, you go to church on Sunday, and there's no such thing as going to church because the church is not a place. The church is a people. So when you go to church and you have a pastor who's like the top ball player, and you go there and you watch him perform and you cheer, and then on Monday, you go about your business, and then you come back next week again and you cheer. So a lot of people don't understand how the church is designed to function and that they are the church. You don't go to church, you are the church. And everybody in church has a role and assignment. So most people who say that they go to church, they are fans. They go to watch a performance and they critique it and then they go home. We are supposed to be actively involved. Every person in the kingdom has an assignment. I think one of the most important things about Bahamas Faith Ministries that has allowed us to continue, because we were susceptible to failure if we were based upon Myles Munroe. But one of the important things that Myles Munroe did, and this is important for every church, is he continually emphasized the vision. And we were all bought into the vision beyond the personality. So when he passed away, people said, well, okay, what is the new vision for the church? And I said, we don't have a new vision because this church was founded on a vision. The way the vision is presented, the way it's translated may be different, but it's the vision that drew all of us together. And if you believe in this vision, then this is where you belong. Not if you believe in Myles Munroe, the personality. And what surprised people is that when Myles Munroe passed away, during the first year, we grew by 15%.
Wow.
We've continued to thrive because the vision has been the center of Bahamas Faith Ministries, not personality. So Bahamas Faith Ministries, even though Dave Burrows is the leader, people are attached to the vision. And one of the things that I have been doing and I continue to emphasize is getting people into their assigned roles so that they are the church. They are not looking at me as the church. And the way pastors are treated, not only in the Bahamas, but in many places of the world, the pastor visits the sick, he preaches, he does everything, and then the people sit on the side and do nothing.
Oh no, they criticize how he does all those
and they
things.
criticize. They criticize. They criticize how he does what he does. But my job is to get people involved. So the Bible says the purpose of the pastor is to equip the saints or the persons in the church to do the work of the ministry. So the work of the ministry is not supposed to be done by the pastor. But a lot of people don't realize that. And when you realize that, then it changes the dynamic. When we are all involved, then we are moving forward with a vision. We are not following a superstar personality and cheering him on. And then if something goes wrong, then we all leave the church.
Wow.
If you are bought into a vision, you stay there because you are a part of the vision.
If somebody, I
Mic
can
drop.
say, in my case, obviously I have a new baby. That's changed my dynamics in ministry. And this will be my last question. People might feel discouraged. I don't have a lot of time on my hand. We're building a business. We're extremely busy, but we still want to do the work, the high level work of the ministry. What are things people can do in their everyday life to have a positive impact on the world?
When people tell me they don't have time, I tell them you're joking, because there are so many things we can do. Let me give you an example. Every person in the church, they can decide between Monday and Sunday, I'm going to call one person or I'm going to find someone on my job and I'm going to say, can I pray with you about something? We have time to do the work that Christ assigned us to do. If it's not a major role, it's a minor role, but everybody can do something. We all have WhatsApp. We can text people. We can find somebody who's hurting and just send them a text and say, hey, I'm praying for you. So everyone can play a role. To do nothing is an insult to God. And you just have to determine with the time that you have available, what is your best contribution? Not, I can't really do anything because I don't have time. you know, and everybody has time. You have time for what is priority in your life. And if you say God bless you and you are thanking him and he sustained you and all these kinds of things, and then you walk away and do nothing, you're insulting God. And all of us have a contribution to play.
I want to actually get another quote from your book, Following a Legend. It says, handle the exchange effectively. Never hand off to someone who is not already running. A successor who has never been in the race is not prepared to handle the exchange. Can you talk about that? And then also I want to weave that into something that you talk about a lot, which is receipts.
Yeah, absolutely. One of the most important lessons, I believe, is that you have to not employ people, but you have to deploy people. When you employ people, it means that they are working for you. When you deploy them, it means they are working for you, but you are preparing them for the future. And that's what one of the statements that Dr. Munroe made. He said, you have to deploy people, not employ them. So the leadership team around him was prepared for deployment. And I was being deployed in another arena just before that, and I just had to shift. So that preparation and that understanding was one of the keys.
If I'm not mistaken, a week before, the passing, he actually said to you that, one, he was proud of you, and the fact that you were no longer his youth pastor, you were his pastor, if that makes sense, if I'm not mistaken.
He said that on the morning that he passed away.
Wow.
At the church service, Dr. Pinder and I, we were both presenting our new books. So at that time, I'd written about 14 or 15 books. And as we presented the book, Dr. Pinder and I came on the stage, and I was dressed in, really nice attire and everything, wearing a tie. I was not a tie person. I didn't really dress up. And so he said to me, man, turn around from the people. And he said, look at my, at Pastor Dave. He said, you're no longer my youth pastor. You are my new pastor.
Wow.
He said it on that Sunday morning. And it was crazy because my wife reminded me of it. I didn't even remember it,
Wow.
How does it, obviously when you're, as a believer, you're reconciling your faith in God with tragedy. You're reconciling this God who is generous to us, who does things for us, who heals us, who protects us. But you're also reconciling the fact that the Bible talks about suffering and loss and how that plays into the bigger picture. When you play it back, even beyond that, I know just certain things because of personal conversations. You were getting ready to hand in your resignation. And he said, I think I need you a little bit longer. And so when you play back all these messages that now they seem kind of like they were like cryptic indications of what was going to happen, like God was letting us know in a sense, or that we would be able to hold on to it after the fact. How do you reconcile all of that?
Well, one of the amazing things about life is what we do not know. The reason why we have to trust God is because there are things that are happening behind the scenes that we have no idea about. And trying to figure it out is almost an impossible task because we don't possess the knowledge that he has. So we have to kind of trust him and see how things materialize. But, there were so many, I guess you could call it weird coincidences that happened. So many things that were just amazing. As you mentioned, I was supposed to be gone. We had conversations. I remember before he went to South Africa, or maybe while he was in South Africa, we talked about what was supposed to happen was I had developed a plan for my future beyond BFM. I had initiated something called the Youth and Family Center. I had decided that I was going to continue my life as a global consultant. And he had agreed to release me into that destiny in November But he said to me, I believe it was, I think it was in South Africa. He was in South Africa, and we had a conversation. And he said, I still need you in the church. And I said, well, Chief, what you need me for? And he said, I don't know, but I still need you. And we decided to postpone that
Retirement.
That transition until August of 2015. But we know what happened, you know. So it was kind of a surreal experience.
Just to kind of put a pin in this conversation, what advice would you give to other leaders handling crisis management? Like, what strong advice could you give them?
Well, I think...
or unexpected crisis, rather.
Yeah.
Sorry.
I think one of the most important things is preparation. You know, sometimes we don't think about the future and what could possibly happen, which is why not only succession planning is important, but contingency planning. And that's something that I'm learning. You know, one of the things we talked about succession before Dr. Munroe passed away, and we did have a succession plan of sorts. But what we didn't have was a contingency plan. What happens if Dr. Munroe is not here tomorrow? That's something that we didn't have. And I think that's important, to have a succession plan, to have a transition plan, and then to have a contingency plan.
Yeah.
You know, I realized the importance of that contingency plan.
It's interesting when you say that, because I feel like this could apply to not just ministry, but business, and honestly, even family.
Yeah.
Because when you have that conversation, you know, we're not getting younger, we're all getting older, and our parents at some point are gonna pass away, and then we're gonna be the next patriarch to, you know, take on the next generation. So making sure you have things in alignment in terms of whether it be a will or just in terms of the vision for the family and how you want things to be carried on, and having those tough conversations to say, okay, what happens if tomorrow I'm not here? You know what I mean? How are you going to take care of this and that? And who's going to take care of the mother, the father, or things of that nature? So I feel like that could be applied to family side, business side as well, especially me, because I'm in a family business. So
yeah, absolutely. You know, one of the things that you don't want to happen is you don't want tragedy or a sudden event to take place, and then you have to now figure out what to do.
Yeah.
When you have a contingency plan in place, then you know, okay, if this happens, here's what you do. And I think that's very important for leaders.
Awesome.
That is super important. I think we're switching gears more into a holistic view of life. One of the things that I admire about you, and I think it was a birthday video that my brother would have mentioned, is that you're very integrated. You have, sometimes when people elevate in society in terms of influence, they can be a little distant, or they evolve in such a way that you can't recognize the old them, so to speak. But your character kind of translates, no matter if you're talking to a young man off the street or if you're talking to the prime minister, somehow you manage to exude the same energy, to appear to be fully the same person. It's not like you code switch. You are you. I mean, and you know how to behave in different circumstances, but you're very good at always being yourself. How do you bring that approach to all of life?
Well, I think one of the lessons that I learned is you have to be prepared to relate from the outhouse to the White House. You know, you can't shrink in any environment, and you can't not be relatable in different types of environments. You know, one of the things that I learned is that I have to be able to relate to the guy on the street, but I also have to relate to the guy in the boardroom, or if I have to speak to the prime minister or whoever. And so we have to be prepared to be relevant in different environments. And that's what I've learned to do. You know, so I can still go and talk to the guy on the street corner, but then I can sit down in the White House and I can talk to the president.
I feel like that's somewhat to do with the self-discovery aspect that you talked about earlier, just knowing yourself, right? And I do feel that a lot of people don't have confidence in who they are because they haven't done some some of the things that they consider the hard work, whether doing things that you said you would do, continuously show up and, prove yourself right in many situations, i.e. having the receipts, you know what I mean? Being able to walk and talk. So talk about this concept of receipts, because that's something I know I wanted you to bring up in this conversation.
Well, wherever I travel, I remember I was doing consulting work for a government, and they were questioning me in terms of the validity of what I was presenting. And so I said, well, the most important thing for me to let you know about is the receipts. And the receipts are the lives of people who are transformed. So when I talk about transformation, I'm not talking about a vague topic. I'm talking about gangbangers who are on the streets, who are criminals, who today are husbands, fathers, business leaders. I'm talking about young people who had no particular direction in life. Today, they are business people. When we look around in the Bahamas, when we look at the media houses, a lot of the media houses are run in large part by persons who've come up under my mentorship.
Scott's House Media.
People don't realize the imprint of BFM. And when we talk about BFM, the youth ministry of BFM was probably one of the most critical elements of BFM.
One of one.
Because when you look at it, the leaders, the movers and shakers, so many of them came through the youth ministry, and their character was formed, and you can see the development. As I go around the Bahamian society, we have people in all kinds of leadership positions, whether it's parliament, whether it's business, whatever it is, you have people whose lives have been transformed. So these are receipts. When I talk about leadership development, when I talk about youth development, when I talk about transformation, I have the names, faces, and stories to match what I say. And that's very important. When you show up somewhere and you say you have done something, let's say, for example, you bought an iPad, and you go back into the store and you said, well, I bought an iPad from here. They say, where's your receipt? And then you show your receipt, they say, yeah, okay, this is genuine.
Yeah.
And so wherever I go, I have receipts.
I would like to just genuinely say I am a proud recipient of one of your receipts. You know what I mean? This beautiful lady sitting across from me, I am a proud recipient of it, because this woman don't give me no stress. This woman don't give me no problem. She is an awesome mother. I can tell, that she's growing up in a loving home with values, and that's what attracted me towards her. Now, I would be remiss in this conversation that we don't bring up your wife, your partner, and you affectionately call her your wifey for lifey, right? Because in this conversation of harmony, we talk about faith, family, business, etc. So I want to make sure have a holistic view, because you couldn't do it by yourself. What would you say has been one of your strongest? Let me rephrase that. How important was marriage to you and your success? And then also, if you could tag on some advice to young men, and even men, I'm still a young man, but myself as well, newly in marriage, some of the principles that you feel that they can take to just have an effective marriage and family life.
Well, I must say this, the Bible says if you find a wife, especially a good wife, if you find a wife, you find a good thing. And God blessed me with a good thing, because my wife has been absolutely strong through the process. She's an incredible leader in her own right. She doesn't like the public view, but she is tremendous behind the scenes. She was critical in the development of the ministry. She was critical in supporting me. What I found is that I had to make a lot of tough decisions. I had to take the ministry forward. There were people who were used to the way Dr. Munroe did it. There were people who expected me to just fall in line. And I had to make a decision that I had to translate where BFM was to where it should be, which meant that I had to change some things around. I had to introduce new concepts. I had to bring in younger people. And all of these things are kind of taxing because you are upsetting an environment that existed for a long time. But my wife was my strength through the process. She was very insightful. She provided support. She provided advice. And she is kind of the behind the scenes person that makes a lot of things happen. I'll tell you a funny story. So years ago, Dr. Munroe was trying to get me into pastoring. And he actually announced it before we discussed it. And so
Sounds like Dr. Miles.
They're very on brand.
and so I said, I used to call him Chief. I said, Chief, that's not me. And he said something to me. He said, don't worry, your wife will show you what to do.
Wow.
And so he recognized some things in her.
Wow.
And I always tell people she's a much better pastor than I am. I'm out front, but she knows what to do. She has a tremendous aptitude in dealing with people and various circumstances. So having a wife who is gifted, talented, insightful, and spiritual makes a big difference, and it really ensures your success.
All right. Well, I do want to wrap up this conversation, but before we go, can you give our listeners and viewers, I would say, maybe one critical principle for transformation, or just in the sense of living a life in harmony that's, honorable to your Heavenly Father? Can you give at least one principle that they can take away and apply?
Well, I want to go back to purpose versus instinct. I think we have to examine ourselves and ask ourselves, are we living purpose or instinct? Many times what causes us to get off course in life is we are pursuing things. And one of the things that the Bible says, Jesus said very clearly, is he said, seek first the kingdom. The kingdom is about your purpose. God designed us, he made us, he has a destiny for us. If we seek things, then we live on instinct. If we seek the kingdom, we live on purpose. And when you live on purpose, he said, the things will come afterwards. But sometimes we prioritize the things instead of the purpose.
Wow. That is a great one to take away. That's a good note to end the episode. Well, we want to thank you so much for being our first guest on the podcast.
Yes.
This won't be the first. This won't be the last time, sorry, that we'll have you on for sure. We definitely want to have you on in the future. But thank you so much for believing us and taking the time out of your busy schedule to sit with us, man.
My pleasure. It was definitely a pleasure.
Awesome.